10 of the most gruesome serial killer murders. Welcome back to Twisted Tales, where we step into the darkest corners of human history and examine the minds of those who committed unimaginable crimes. Tonight's episode explores 10 of the most disturbing serial killer cases ever recorded. Crimes so shocking they reshaped investigations, terrified entire communities, and forced society to confront the depths of human depravity. These stories are difficult. They involve real victims and real families whose lives were forever changed. Our goal is not to sensationalize, but to remember and to understand how such darkness can exist. Take a breath. Let's begin. Number 10. Richard Chase and Terry Wallin. In the late 1970s, Northern California was gripped by fear. A man later dubbed the vampire killer of Sacramento was stalking the streets. Richard Chase suffered from severe mental illness. He believed his blood was turning to powder. He believed his heart was shrinking. And most disturbingly, he believed drinking blood would cure him. His crimes escalated from killing animals to targeting people. In 1978, 22-year-old Terry Wallin, who was pregnant at the time, became one of his victims. Chase forced his way into her home in broad daylight. What followed shocked even seasoned investigators. The crime scene was one of the most disturbing Sacramento had ever witnessed. Chase's obsession with blood and delusion had turned lethal. His capture ended a reign of terror, but the fear he instilled in Northern California lingered for years. Number 9. Ed Kemper and Iko Koo. Edmund Kemper appeared intelligent, soft-spoken, cooperative, but behind that calm exterior was a man filled with resentment and violent fantasies. Kemper blamed much of his psychological turmoil on his deeply strained relationship with his mother. Many of his crimes were rooted in rage toward women who reminded him of her. In 1972, 15-year-old Iko Koo, a Korean teenager hitchhiking in California, crossed paths with him. Kemper picked her up, then overpowered her shortly afterward. He later returned home as if nothing had happened, hiding evidence inside the same house he shared with his mother. Investigators would later learn that Kemper kept souvenirs from victims and revisited his crimes long after committing them. Eventually, in a shocking turn, Kemper murdered his own mother and then turned himself in. His chilling calmness during interviews still unsettles criminologists to this day. Number 8. William Bonin and Donald Ray Hayden. Southern California freeways became hunting grounds in the late 1970s. William Bonin, known as the Freeway Killer, targeted teenage boys and young men. He would offer rides, then subject his victims to prolonged torment. At least 21 young people lost their lives. 15-year-old Donald Ray Hayden was last seen near Santa Monica Boulevard in 1979. Hours later, his body was discovered in a dumpster. The brutality of the crime revealed a pattern of calculated cruelty. Bonin often worked with accomplices, making his crimes even more chilling. The freeways that symbolize freedom and movement had become corridors of fear. Bonin was eventually convicted and executed, but for many families, justice could never restore what was taken. Number 7. Andrei Chikatilo and Irina Pogoryalova. In the Soviet Union during the 1980s, children and young women began disappearing. The killer would later be known as the Butcher of Rostov. Andrei Chikatilo appeared ordinary, a teacher, a husband, a father. But over more than a decade, he murdered dozens. 18-year-old Irina Pogoryalova disappeared in August 1986. Her body was found days later in a rural area. Chikatilo's crimes were marked by extreme violence and psychological disturbance. He claimed he feared being identified through his victim's eyes, a delusion that fueled further mutilation. His capture required one of the largest manhunts in Soviet history. When he finally confessed, investigators uncovered a pattern of crimes stretching back years, crimes that had haunted entire communities. Number 6. Joachim Kroll and Marion Ketter. Germany faced its own nightmare between the 1950s and 1970s. Joachim Kroll, known as the Ruhr Hunter, murdered at least 14 people over 2 decades. In 1976, 4-year-old Marion Ketter disappeared. Suspicion quickly fell on Kroll. When police entered his apartment, what they discovered shocked even veteran officers. Kroll had a long history of targeting vulnerable individuals and revisiting the same locations years apart. It was a neighbor's complaint about plumbing problems that ultimately led police to evidence that ended his killing spree. His case remains one of the most disturbing in German criminal history. Number 5. Peter Kürten, Gertrude Hammacher, and Louise Lenson. Germany in the 1920s was terrorized by a man called the Vampire of Dusseldorf. Peter Curtin confessed to multiple murders, arsons, and assaults. He described feeling overwhelming excitement from violence. In August 1929, two foster sisters, 5-year-old Gertrude Hammager and 14-year-old Louise Lenson, attended a local fair. They never made it home. Curtin lured them away. Both were killed. His crimes shocked Europe not only for their brutality, but for his disturbing psychological profile. Even psychiatrists struggled to categorize him. He was eventually captured after writing letters to authorities in newspapers, seemingly craving recognition. Number 4. John Wayne Gacy and John Butkovich.
Evidence presented to be compelling.
John Wayne Gacy lived a double life. By day, he was a contractor and community figure. He even performed as Pogo the Clown at local events. By night, he was murdering young men. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy killed 33 victims. 17-year-old John Butkovich worked for Gacy. After a dispute over unpaid wages, he disappeared. Investigators later determined Gacy had lured him into his home under false pretenses. Gacy often used manipulation and a so-called handcuff trick to immobilize victims before attacking them. When police finally searched his property, they uncovered remains buried beneath his house. The discovery horrified the nation. Number 3. Jeffrey Dahmer and Konarak Synthesomphone. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes are among the most infamous in American history. In 1991, 14-year-old Konarak Synthesomphone encountered Dahmer in Milwaukee. Dahmer often lured young men to his apartment with promises of money or photography work. On one horrifying night, Konarak briefly escaped and was found disoriented outside. Police were called. Dahmer convinced officers that the teen was his adult partner and that everything was fine. They returned the boy to Dahmer's apartment. It was a catastrophic failure. Konarak was murdered shortly afterward. When Dahmer was arrested weeks later, authorities uncovered evidence of 17 murders. The case led to major reforms in police accountability and highlighted systemic failures that allowed the tragedy to unfold. Number 2. Richard Speck and the 1966 Nurses. In July 1966, Chicago experienced one of the most shocking mass murders in American history. Richard Speck broke into a dormitory housing student nurses. Over the course of one night, 8 young women were murdered. One survivor hid under a bed and later identified Speck by a distinctive tattoo. The scale and randomness of the crime stunned the country. Speck had a long criminal history, yet no one predicted the violence that would unfold that evening. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he remained until his death. Number 1. Albert Fish and Grace Budd. Albert Fish may be one of the most disturbing serial offenders ever documented. In 1928, he contacted the Budd family under the pretense of offering employment to their son. Instead, he gained the trust of the family and persuaded them to let 10-year-old Grace Budd accompany him to what he described as a party. Grace never returned home. Months later, Fish sent a letter to her mother describing the murder in chilling detail. A letter so disturbing it became infamous in criminal history. Fish was eventually arrested after investigators traced the letter. His crimes, driven by extreme psychological disturbance, remain among the most haunting cases of the 20th century. These cases remind us that evil does not always appear monstrous at first glance. Sometimes it hides behind charm, sometimes behind authority, sometimes behind normalcy. Behind every headline was a life lost, families shattered, communities scarred. If these stories affected you, take a moment, step away, breathe. If you found this episode meaningful or informative, let us know which case left the deepest impact on you. And if you want more true crime stories that examine the psychology, history, and consequences behind these events, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another episode of Twisted Tales. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware of the darkness that sometimes hides in plain sight.